Hi, who are you and what are you doing at Copenhagen?
So I'm Phil Bloomer, I'm the Campaigns and Policy Director for Oxfam. I'm here as part of our global team to try and make sure that the issues of poverty and the issues of long-term development for poor people are front and centre to these negotiations on climate, in terms of people's adaptation to climate change, which is already upon them, many poor people in developing countries, as well as trying to ensure that there's also financing for low-carbon development in poorer countries.
Okay. Today's Humanitarian Day at Copenhagen. What does that mean in terms of the negotiations? How are the concerns of the least developed countries being heard, especially today as we approach the end of the summit?
Well, quite frankly, at the moment, the concerns of particularly the poorest countries are not being heard. I mean, the most vulnerable countries in the world don't see a deal on the table that is going to deliver their survival in the long term. And so many of them are coming together today with key people such as Desmond Tutu, Mary Robinson, the ex-president of Ireland, to highlight the importance of the humanitarian day, of the humanitarian issues, the enormous rise that there's already been in the intensity and frequency of tropical storms, be they typhoons or hurricanes, as well as right now the extraordinary extended drought that's hitting East Africa countries, poor countries such as Somalia through to Kenya and Uganda. And we're trying to highlight the way in which climate change is changing those people's lives, making their livelihoods much more difficult, ensuring that they can adapt to those massive changes, but also that there's going to be humanitarian support when inevitably they cannot adapt to some of the changes that are so intense that they can't adapt to them.
Just to be clear, why did the African nations lead a walkout yesterday, and what do they want?
The African countries didn't walk out yesterday, but they did temporarily suspend the talks because they see, first of all, that their issues and not being the issues that are necessary for the long-term survival of the livelihoods of poor people are not currently on the table. They were particularly concerned yesterday that rich countries were trying to avoid their responsibilities to reduce carbon emissions, to at least make sure that they don't get to catastrophic levels. So the avoidance of rich countries yesterday to get to the right targets in terms of reducing their greenhouse gas pollution rapidly was being avoided, and that's why the Africans called for a suspension. They called for a suspension of the Kyoto Protocol discussions, etc. But those are technical wrangles. What was at root of this was that unless we can keep global temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade, that means for Africa a 3 to 4 degree temperature rise, and in many countries their crops are already at the upper limits of their heat tolerance. So a 3 to 4 degree rise is basically the end of much of the crop production in key areas of the tropics. So that's why they were coming out yesterday and demanding that rich countries adopt targets that are going to keep global temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade.
Mm-hmm. At this point, what are you doing now? What is Oxfam doing now? I mean, today and the next couple of days, to come out with some sort of fair deal?
So we're working on two key areas.
Okay.
In fact, three. We're trying to make our main priority at the moment is to make sure that the financing, the long-term financing for developing countries is available to them, both for their adaptation as well as for a low-carbon development future. Secondly, we're trying to ensure that there is real pressure into rich countries to adopt the mitigation targets, the reduction in their greenhouse gas pollution targets that are necessary to stay below 2 degrees centigrade. And thirdly, we're trying to make sure that we are going to get a legal treaty and not simply another political agreement which has no teeth in terms of the final delivery of what are going to be, initially at least, quite painful targets to get to.
Mm-hmm. Do you see one country or a couple countries in particular holding things up right now in terms of financing?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that in terms of the financing that's on the table, no country has yet come out with the figures that are necessary. They're coming up with small figures now in terms of the short term, but too many of them are using that as a distraction for what's necessary after 2012. And so far the United States has come up with no real figures. It has the opportunity to do so. We're still hopeful that it will. The European Union has come up with some figures, but they're not firmed up sufficiently for them to be taken fully seriously. No country groupings have come out and said that those monies will be additional to development assistance. And that's going to be necessary if we're going to continue to make sure that countries can develop and adapt to climate change. So those are the key areas where we've got to get the heads of state to really focus their minds in the next 72 hours.
Are you expecting any developments to be made today, and what can the heads of state do once they arrive, given that no progress is made today?
I think it's very difficult to see that we're going to make a lot of progress today. You never know. We remain hopeful. But I think what people are doing is testing and preparing positions for the heads of state to adopt. But let's not make any mistake. Really, the text has to be written by Thursday night if the heads of state are going to sign anything on Friday night. So we've really got 48 hours left to deliver something of substance. And we've spent 2 years arsing about, really not delivering on the text. So what should have been prepared in the last 2 years, we've got 48 hours to deliver on now. In the text, as it stands, there is everything that is necessary for a fair and safe and binding deal. But it has to be pulled out from a lot of other text that is potentially diabolical in its consequences for all of us.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that? What other texts?
Well, there's a huge amount of text, much of it in square brackets, and we've got to get rid of the bits of the square brackets that are very, very bad.
Yeah.
And we've got to pull out and put in a new text the square brackets that are very, very good. So everything's there everything's there in that long turgid text. We've got to pull out the best pieces and make it into a single text which the heads of state adopt on Friday night.
Okay, thank you very much.